Hey, folks. Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. This is Mind Your Banners for Friday, October 3rd, a beautiful Friday. A quiet Friday, at least in football season terms. Indiana navigating through the end of the first of two bye weeks this season. But there's some basketball to talk about. We will at least sort of nod toward one of the biggest games in probably IU football history next week, though obviously we'll have a lot more for you on IU Oregon next week. But here with me, as always, today is Mike Niziolek from the Bloomington Herald Times. Mike, how are we doing?
I'm good. How are you, Zach?
I'm good. I had some corn dogs for lunch. What do you think about that?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I just didn't have a lot else lying around. Need to get to the grocery store. But I forgot to turn the comments on. Let's do that. Tyler Attachment says IU by 50. Tyler, they're not playing anyone this weekend, so there's a very good chance they will win. Let's start by putting a bow on the Iowa game, and just sort of maybe take a slightly holistic view of Indiana's first 5 weeks. We talked about in the preseason that it felt like that 5 week stretch was really going to set a lot of the terms and expectations for the rest of this season. I think it's fair to say that it did. If we talk specifically about Iowa, I mean, we have had 6 days to digest it. I know I've got some thoughts on this, but I'm just curious how you see that game kind of in the cold light of context, knowing what it means to Indiana's season, knowing what it sets up next week, and maybe some of the questions that it answers and some of the questions that it raises.
I don't know if that it raised any questions, because I think that was a tough team to beat on the road in front of a sold-out crowd. I think those are the games that are tricky, because maybe it's not as talented of a roster, but it's a roster that's really well coached. So they're certainly capable of, I think, beating teams that are, top 25 teams. And I haven't heard any, what's interesting is I've heard less nationally questioning the validity of the opponents. That, the Illinois game, I heard more of that than the Iowa game. Like I didn't hear much of like, oh, Indiana struggled, look, they're not for real or anything like that. I think people, especially people that
do you think that's in part because like the week was just so loaded, a lot of people probably didn't watch much of the game? It was on Peacock. There were a ton of huge games last week. Like if Indiana Iowa were this weekend, it would probably be, I mean, I don't have the conference schedule in front of me, but I remember seeing it earlier in the week and thinking Indiana Iowa would be the best game on the schedule this week.
Maybe a little of that, but I just think that, look, they find a way because all these teams are voting. I mean, like the AP vote, the coaches vote, all these different things that kind of come after each week. They found a way to sort of knock Indiana each time that they've gone out of their way. It hasn't mattered sort of what the field looks like. But I do think that, look, this was a win that proved something for Indiana. And it was just important. I feel like that, I think you saw it on, we only talked to a handful of people, obviously, after the game in terms of Cignetti and players. But I think you pointed out that sense of maybe not relief, but just, excitement about it. They felt good about the win, even though, at times, they haven't made mistakes and things. But like that was a good win. And I think the team felt like that.
I also think if you like go under the hood in the box score, like there's more to like than maybe it felt like in the moment. And I understand why Indiana fans, like in the moment, you're thinking, man, it's a close game. We're not used to this. We know how difficult it is to win at Iowa. Like I said to somebody this week that Iowa football, maybe not necessarily schematically, but certainly philosophically, is the closest thing the Big Ten has to the option anymore. Like it's such a distinct challenge to basically anything else you have to do in the Big Ten. Iowa at Kinnick, the way Kirk Ferentz's teams play. And, listen, like I'm Indiana, as you said, was far from perfect, but 233 and 2 touchdowns for Fernando Mendoza, as an example, is still a perfectly sound number against that team and that environment, especially when you can acknowledge it wasn't like he squeezed every drop out of that game. He missed some throws. I thought the one that he missed to Omar Cooper, I think would have made it 14-3. that's the one time that was the one time that I thought Indiana had an opportunity to kind of break the lid off the top of the game. And sort of like if you get Iowa behind by multiple scores and they're really chasing, like it gets a little bit different. Indiana bumped 6 runs of 10 plus yards. Iowa had only allowed 4 all season. Indiana beat Iowa in special teams. Iowa missed a field goal. Indiana blocked a punt. That is not something that many teams do to Kirk Ferentz's Iowa. Indiana forced as many turnovers in that game as Iowa had through the first 4 weeks of the season. And Iowa hadn't played, a crazy schedule, although Iowa State might be pretty good this year, but they'd already played 2 P4 teams. So it's not like Iowa's success through the first 4 weeks was just a function of their schedule. I just thought I will also say this. Not that I think his teammates weren't behind him or didn't believe in him before, but I think Fernando Mendoza earned something important with the way that the toughness that he showed through that game, some of the hits that he stood in and was willing to take, to deliver some balls, not least, of course, the one to Elijah Surratt, which, Surratt deserves credit for breaking the tackle, but it's a tackle around the ankles. That play is made by Mendoza delivering that ball accurately against pressure he knows is coming, and he knows, roughly speaking, where it's coming from. I think he earned something from his teammates in that game. I think part of the reason why that hit at the end of the third quarter feels significant is because I think a lot of Indiana players see their quarterback do that. He's trying to get a first down. He's willing to take that contact to get that moment for his team. I don't think Indiana crossed some Rubicon in this game, but I do think there were a lot of really valuable sort of learning experiences, and I think that they certainly felt like they had accomplished something very meaningful after the game. There was no,
talking about. You've mentioned it before. Fans just kind of waiting with bated breath for the old Indiana to show up, and every opportunity they've sort of said no. Look, these were games. You made the comparison to what 21, the opener. You said it was the one where everybody was sort of
that was the one at Iowa where
Iowa, right?
6 on the first play, and
and so and it was the complete opposite, right? The Indiana scored on the opening play this time, and I think you've seen them flip the script constantly. Every time people are like, "Uh-oh, this is another opportunity where things could go haywire," and they keep doing what they do. Look, it wasn't a 40-point win, but I think, like I said, I mentioned, Cignetti being kind of pleased with the, fortitude his team showed, because he likes winning one possession game. It's one of I don't have the number, what his record in front of me, but he's talked about it constantly, that he knows, his teams know how to play in those moments. And it wasn't perfect, but added another win, and it needed it, because they had not had they won a one possession game with him under the I don't think so, right? That was the first one.
Michigan.
I was right. Yes, identical score. That's right.
And we talked about, though, that game carried, I think, a very different meaning. That was more like this kind of symbolic moment of its first 10-win season, as you've talked about.
They were leading at halftime in that game. This was the first time
they were cruising at halftime in that game. If
anything, that game got very losing and won a game. Basically,
yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Indiana, I guess, I wish there was a cleaner way to say this, but Indiana at 5 games then, because I think we always looked at this schedule and we talked about the way that it's set up and how the first big test is at home, and Iowa is probably the most winnable of the 3 road games, and that it just sort of, it feels like it sort of ramps up, right? And all Indiana can do for the moment is what Indiana's done, which is win the first 5. And listen, the numbers, I think, if anything, probably suggest Indiana's got a little bit more ceiling to explore. They are the only team in the Big Ten right now in the top 4 in scoring offense, scoring defense, total offense, and total defense. Now that's a little bit of a misnomer, because I think Oregon's 5th in one of those categories, but still,
I think a better way to categorize, they're one of only 2 teams. I think Texas Tech is the other, that's in the top 10 in total offense and total defense.
They're also 3rd in the S&P Plus, which is some of this is a function of having the Indiana State game, right, which is going to inflate.
But they only numbers. We talked about their total offense,
but also
they
scored 63 points against Illinois. So like you don't get to complain that the numbers are inflated when they scored 73 against Indiana State if they also scored 63 against Illinois.
But they're still averaging 47 points and I think 500 38 yards per game after both numbers coming way under. They had 337 yards of total offense against Iowa and obviously 20 points. So, I mean, like they are still just statistically far away. And the defense added to their statistics because like they didn't really do much out of character. I mean, Iowa didn't do anything really, other than some passes. They moved the ball a little bit, but Indiana didn't allow explosive plays. Indiana didn't allow. I mean, they didn't get to the quarterback as much, but still, I thought generated a decent amount of pressure and created a bunch of havoc. But that was what the defense does.
Yeah, I mean, again, like Iowa doesn't allow you the opportunity to do a lot of that stuff, right? Like Iowa doesn't give you the chance. They're not going to do a bunch of like 5-step drop and 4 progression read. And I'm looking for, and I don't know if ESPN does this, like a win probability graph. Iowa's win probability peaked at, what was this? Iowa's win probability peaked at about 82%. And I think that was right before they missed the field goal. But the game spent, I mean, most of the game in Indiana, in ESPN's win probability graph, most of the game Indiana is favored. And then obviously it kind of swings hard the other way at the end. I mean, I just like, I don't know that Indiana's going to win at Oregon or at Penn State. I think certainly they have proven that it's possible. And even more than that, and this, this is where I say again, you need to be an Iowa fan for the rest of the year. You need to be an Illinois fan for the rest of the year. This is also where the more those wins validate you, the more I think this looks like a team. And you talk about maybe the national sentiment not being quite so skeptical of Indiana. Indiana, I think a lot of people just look at this team and they just say that's a playoff team. Like look at them, look at the way they play football, look at the players they have. That's a playoff team. Maybe it's not the best team in America. Maybe it's not the most athletic, or there's another team with a better run game or another team with a better secondary or whatever. But that's a playoff or playoff level team. And of course, we also need to know how the field shapes up. We're too far away to know how many bids will the Big Ten earn, or how many bids should the SEC get, or is the ACC a 1-bid league or a 2-bid league, or maybe a no-bid league? Like it is, how much does the Big 12 merit? Yada, yada, yada. Is Notre Dame going to be, that's going to be a fascinating sort of case study in brands versus resumes. But if Notre Dame wins out, but I think everyone can, I think smart football people have set aside a lot of the sort of, well, it's Indiana, I'm not sure, skepticism, and just been able to say that looks like a playoff team again. And maybe they're 13th, maybe they're 14th, maybe they wind up, just on the wrong side of the bubble, but they are in that conversation so long as obviously they take care of business in the 5 games that they're likely to be favored in. And I think that, we've talked about this before too. One of the great superpowers that Curt Cignetti seems to have as a coach is that his teams do not lose focus. His teams do not like play down to competition. When they lose, they lose on the merits. They lose on the opponent's merits. Essentially, they're
going to be double-digit favorites probably in every game except Oregon and Penn State. I mean, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, the one curiosity would be Maryland. Like Maryland has quietly been better than certainly quietly been better than people expected this year. And like, if you look at their schedule, I mean,
they don't play anybody. They play Washington,
exactly.
Nebraska at UCLA. So yeah, I mean,
they could be like 6-1, something like that going into that game. But I think Indiana would still be favored, but it might be like a touchdown, something like that.
But anyway, but I think you made this point maybe to me privately. I can't remember, or maybe you made it on the last podcast.
Oh my!
The idea that they go into Oregon without any pressure. That I think that they've moved past the prove it stage, right? That they need a win, or they need to show people this, or they've gotten to these last 2 wins, and sort of I think removed that from the equation, and they can just play football now in these big games against Oregon, against Penn State.
You don't want to get blown out because it's still a resume thing, like it's still a perception thing, but it's not like the Ohio State. It's not the Ohio State game last year where it's like you need to prove yourself to everyone.
Right, and like they're looking to go in to win these games and not get blown out anyway. But the idea that there's not pressure on if there's a bad result, this could be catastrophic to your season's chances. I think you've taken that away, even if it's a lopsided score, especially in the first one. It's not everything on you. And like you said, the build up to the Michigan game, and then obviously the Ohio State game were that like your playoff chances on the line. You need to prove it. You've done nothing. You can't.
Indiana was under more pressure than Ohio State, I would argue, in that game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or that won't be the case against Oregon. And especially as people are pointing out, Penn State's schedule leading up to that game in State College, where I think they have to go to Iowa, and then
because they could have 2 losses in that game, and
the pressure will almost certainly be on Penn State in that game. Yes.
Right, and because even Indiana with the 1 loss versus because Penn State will be in a situation where they played worse than last year. Indiana did in their non-conference, right? Like Penn State won, but they've looked terrible, and they won't have had. Well, do they have play anybody in between then? Well, they had. What's their quality win then? Iowa at Iowa. So I mean, like that would be their best win. So they would need to prove it. But so I just think it's an important thing that Indiana can kind of remove that from the equation and just kind of worry about Oregon as an opponent, not all that other stuff. Have that on their back.
Who's calling?
I think it's somehow my wife's phone's attached to.
Is it Tommy from Landman?
Tommy from yeah.
They need to build a road.
There's an emergency
in the oil fields in Bargersville. Yeah, I mean I'm trying to think if there's because it's funny because on the one hand, you felt like at least I felt like I wanted to see these first 5 games to really sort of set my expectations for this group. Hoosier Viking says, other than Purdue, there are no gimmies on the road in the Big Ten. Hoosier, I don't know if you've seen UCLA this season. They may not have any coaches by the end of November.
They might. Well, they also probably won't have any wins. So, I mean,
Devil D says, great show. This and Landman. Devil D's our guys, our dog. But no, I like on the one hand, I sort of wanted to like suspend judgment until I saw these 5 games because it felt, and I said this a lot of times for the offseason, it felt like 3-2, 4-1, and 5-0 were all kind of like a distinct narrative unto themselves. But on the other hand, like I don't know that there's anything I'm overly surprised by with this. Like Fernando Mendoza looks good. He also needed a little while to settle in. We expected that. The offensive line is better. We're going to find out exactly how much better against Oregon and against Penn State, but it's better. You knew what you had in Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt, in Aiden Fisher or D'Angelo Pons. I mean, even to some extent, even somebody like Roman Himby, right? And maybe the scale of Indiana's run game is the one big piece that has kind of like changed sort of my thinking around this program. Or this team, not this program, but this team. But, I expected Indiana to start 5-0. I think we both did. We both predicted that they would. But I don't know. And obviously, neither one of us, I don't think anybody would have seen Indiana beating Illinois the way that Indiana had, wound up beating Illinois. But, like, is there anything that's really that surprising, I guess, about this team so far?
No, because I mean, in my preseason prediction, I had them going 5-0, like at this point, and being undefeated going in the Oregon game, and we both had them being a playoff team. So I mean, like, if that was true, like this is probably what it had to look like, to get there, to get to that result. And so, to me, like you said, I guess the most surprising thing was the Illinois game, and then that Illinois might not be terrible, that Indiana might just be good, that good.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
like,
that's yeah.
It's like USC, they came back and won. And so, because you thought the wheels could fall off after that, and like the Illinois was just done, and it was a bad team. Because like those things, the lopsided score, nature of that score, it was
coupled to some of the injuries, and coupled to like injuries. Yeah.
And so, but the idea that it's just simply Indiana might be more talented than that group of the Big Ten, right, outside of the top tier. It's separating itself further is probably like the biggest surprise. Like there was a gap this year, and everybody sort of questioned, like, well, is it legitimate? Are they, are these teams bad? Like maybe just Indiana's good, and to a section of the Big Ten like the Ohio States and Oregons of the world that they do this routinely. It's not shocking to see. Like that's what Indiana might be right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I mean, like, Double D here says I don't think IU gets in at 10-2 with losses at Oregon and Penn State.
It'll depend on what the field looks like. I think they'll have an argument for it, for certainly. And I think that
right. I think we're underestimating the strength of what Indiana's going to have. Like right now, the FPI has Indiana somewhere between 10 and 11 wins. They have a 10.6 and 10.6 and 1.8. And obviously that's just the number. That's the probability the computer spit out. I understand that like that statistically doesn't add up. That's more than 12 games. But I think the point is what it's saying is let me couple that to a 68.4% chance of making the playoff, which I think is the fifth best in the country. What the computer models, which are admittedly incomplete this time of year, are saying is that Indiana is statistically likely to be a 10-16 or 10-2 team.
10-6, they've gone
10-6. They're gonna win the NFC South, which they probably could do. That statistically, the likeliest outcome for Indiana is 10-2. And that the models still think Indiana's got a better than coin flips shot of making the playoff. Like that is just sort of like the computers telling you they think 10-2 might be good enough. And again, it's an incomplete sample. But then you look at, consider Indiana next to, for example, Notre Dame. Indiana's gain in that Illinois game is Notre Dame's loss. Notre Dame might not beat a ranked team this year. Unless because like now suddenly – USC looks, they're USC, so they'll get, some kind of bump and bias, but like, they have Michigan this weekend. They're at Nebraska. They have to play at Oregon. It's not inconceivable that USC winds up unranked at the end of the year. And that's probably Notre Dame's best chance for a win. We forget that we have to recalibrate ourselves to this idea that, for decades, excellence was the requirement to have access to the any national championship in college football. Now that bar has been lowered just enough. And a 10-win Big Ten team with a win over a ranked team at home by 53 points and a win at Iowa, I think has a very strong case.
Yeah, one blemish on your schedule is not going to be enough to sort of knock you out or push you out. Like, yes, I think that at 10-2, depending on how the rest of the sort of like SEC cannibalizes each other and some of the other results, like you said, kind of how many bids do the ACC get? Like if the way they're trending, like this might not even be much of a discussion because like the extra bids going to the Big Ten or SEC, but 10-2, they're just going to be there because of their quality of wins now with Illinois and Iowa, and the fact that the losses will be against two teams likely to be in a playoff teams, or at least one. I mean, one of them will surely be, but the second one likely will be. So, there's hard to find fault in that. And then you add on top of the fact that right now, there's obviously a lot of games to be played. The way they are beating teams is reminiscent of how they got into the playoff last year. Like that was what did it for them. How they played in those first 10 games, the lopsided nature of those wins, the one-sided dominance. Like those things do matter in that committee room. And I think like when you look at Indiana, they're just their resume is going to be just so much better because of these last two games. It's going to make a significant difference.
Yeah. And as I've said many times, you can score your way into the committee's heart. Like you can do that. We learned that from Indiana last season when they played a much worse schedule. And the committee said, yes, but look how dominant they have been against that schedule. Just look how good they have been against that schedule. Let's shift gears to basketball. And obviously, it was, again, we will have a lot next week on the Oregon game. We've already recorded to let people sort of behind the curtain a little bit, a preview with your good friend, James Crepia from the Oregonian. We'll have that out sometime midweek. We'll also have our Mind Your Banners, probably, I would guess, Tuesday, because we're going to, we'll figure it out. The point is, we got Hoops Media Days up in Rosemont next week. We will put together a Mind Your Banners that will talk about maybe some of that, but also certainly look heavily at Oregon next week. But this week has been locally dominated by IU men's and women's basketball. They hosted Team Media Days early in the week, and last night you and I were both down on Kirkwood Avenue for Hoosier Hoops on Kirkwood. The first thing I would ask you is essentially just like your impression so far. And I know that's a bit of a loaded question before they play whatever scrimmage they're going to do tonight. But like, I got to look at this team for like a whole week in August. This is your first like long form access to this group.
Oh, we had the one open practice.
Yeah, but even still, like this is proper preseason. I'm just curious, essentially, for just like your impressions, whether it's things you heard, things you saw, things people said, whatever that you've seen so far.
Yeah, I think it's hard because like they were very shorthanded. Like the 5-on-5, I think had 3 walk-ons. Is that or 3 walk-on or 2 walk-ons and what's the newest kid, the new international kid? I don't want to butcher his name.
Andrei Achimovic.
Yeah,
I believe it's Achimovic.
And I don't necessarily think he's going to be a rotational type of player. And I think the one lineup for most of the 5-on-5 was those 3 and Lamar Wilkerson, kind of anchoring that group. And so, look, they were trying to balance it out a little bit and get some competition, but like it's hard. Like I don't think any of the rotations that we saw are kind of going to be it because Nick Dorn's out, Jason Drake's out.
Dorn's working his way back. I think it's important to say like there's a difference between him
out for
and some
contact.
of these other guys. But like he's doing more than he was doing in the summer or even like earlier in the fall. Whereas the other guys are like not participating at the moment.
2-on-2 reps don't give you a real sense of where the team's at. Is more my point. So yeah, sorry, but yeah, he is back. He's further along than these other guys. Rich Stitch, is that right? Is that how you pronounce it? Rich Stitch. He's out as well, and he seems like a nice piece because I mean he did play and do some things really nice in that Puerto Rico trip. Just kind of stepping off the plane, just seems very naturally talented. So I think in terms of like the whole body of work, like I don't know what I know yet, other than this team's going to shoot a lot of threes and score a lot of points. I think defensively it's still sort of a question mark, but like how it all looks kind of coming together, like. What's the depth look like here? Like you mentioned, kind of some of the lineups, they like don't have a lot of point guard depth. So how do they sort of balance it out with the lineups? What is DeVries going to do? The wholesale lineup changes or kind of stagger things to try to keep balancing out. That was one of the big problems with Woodson, especially a non-conference schedule where he'd kind of kill his team by just throwing everybody on the bench and then try to have to work back. Like this team might have to find a little more balance than that, just because. Where guys are at. I mean, the first couple of weeks as guys kind of get back from injuries could be interesting too. Like this team could look a lot different in December than it does right out of the gate as they've kind of are getting guys back to full strength here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, and I wrote about this in Puerto Rico. I think the point guard piece is important. Indiana had to start Connor Enright, and just by nature of who was available and who wasn't, Indiana had to start Connor Enright and Tatum Conaway together in Puerto Rico, and it created issues when those two guys got in foul trouble. And Ristich did look good, but as you said, now he's sidelined for at least a little while. On the other hand, I think, there's a world where Nick Dorn sort of pushes his way into the first 5, and then that moves Enright to the bench, and Enright still plays a lot, but you do get that balance that we're talking about where you're not constantly
like Enright might get the same amount of minutes, but it just made like different.
Right, you're not constantly trying to run the same 2 point guards on the floor most of the time, risking A, the drop off to the bench when they both naturally have to sit, and B, which is what we saw in Puerto Rico, concerns over foul trouble because your point guards are 2 of your best on ball defenders. Like that. That's the other thing is Connor Enright and Tatum Conaway are 2 of Indiana's best on-ball defenders, but that means that sometimes they're going to get in foul trouble because your best defenders tend to take the toughest matchups. So there's that. The other thing that I find intriguing is their wing depth. I mean, for lack of like a more artful way of putting it, they just have a lot of dudes between 6'4" and 6'8" that can handle the ball a little bit, can shoot it well. Nick Dorn didn't have the best 3-point shooting competition Thursday night. In fairness, the shooting backdrop was the sky. So it was probably not
missed his first 7 straight shots. Though.
He did. That's true. But it's worth saying Lamar Wilkerson did not look the fact that just blank space was what he was shooting into did not rattle him at all. I just think when you talk about how this team wins games, when you talk about maybe how the rotation settles out, if you've always got at least a couple of those guys on the floor at any given time that are somewhere between like 6'4" and 6'8", can switch a lot, can make a lot of. I mean, when I say a lot of threes, like they can just be dangerous, right? Like they are just you have to guard them all the way out past the 3-point line. I'm thinking about Wilkerson, Tucker DeVries, Nick Dorn, Trent Sisley, Josiah Miles. Sam Alexis, who said he was the best 3-point shooter on the team this week. That gives you the ability to create matchup problems against almost anybody. And if you are going to have to score your way through some games, that's a really good problem to have, or not really good problem. That is a really good trait to have.
Yeah, and I think I know what the team's like strengths are, but I don't really know how bad their weaknesses are, because like they're not going to be a great defensive team. I don't think it's unfair to say that. And they do not have a lot of size. That's easy to say and easy to see. But like how, like you said, kind of dictating the pace and dictating the flow of the game. Like if they come out and bomb a bunch of threes and make them, like, well, then teams are going to try to have to run with them and match that kind of pace and match that kind of output. And so then maybe they can neutralize the size advantage. But are there going to be teams, particularly once you get into the Big Ten schedule, that will just grind you down and sort of be able to take advantage of sort of the weaknesses you have? And I don't know, because of the fact that we haven't really seen the lineups they're probably going to rely on as much, like how much teams, and they're not going against, when they go up against the walk-ons, they're not going against a group of, volunteer players or combination of whatever. Like they're not going against size that can really hurt them. And so like, how big, how weak are their weaknesses? How significant of a gap is there? Or how much is it going to hurt them in the Big Ten when they just don't necessarily match up well against teams?
And there will be teams that do that. Like that's going to happen. You play 20 Big Ten games. There are going to be a few opponents that just. But
is it more than is it more than just a handful of games? Do they look outmatched?
Yeah, no, I mean, and I don't know. And like this is where I get into my rant every year about like I have no idea what the league will look like, because
that's exactly true. Like how big
so much that it's like I participated in a couple of preseason polls that asked for like order of finish, and all I did was pull up Bart Torvik's rankings and just like make a promise to myself that I wouldn't rank anybody more than 4 spots from where Bart has them right now, because I just because I look at it and I'm like, at least the analytics are taking something into account. They're saying we've got this weight of data on these players, and we've got this sort of formula that we think if we blend all that data together, it will give us something. Like I don't.
As an individual, how do you project when each team has 8 to 10 new players? And
even too, even with the nature of transfers as opposed to freshmen, like
right.
No one, it's certainly not outside Madison, thought John Tonji was going to be one of the 5 best players in the Big Ten last year. He was like the 270 something ranked transfer. He sat out basically all of the previous year at Missouri because of an injury, and then he goes to Wisconsin. Suddenly he's a player of the year candidate. There are too many variables, but it is going to be fascinating, and that's probably where Indiana's non-conference schedule is going to serve it pretty well, because you're going to get tested, you're going to get pushed, and we're going to get a sense early for what I think this team is capable of against high major competition. Devil D asks, how many points do you think Sisley will play on average this year? How many points? How many minutes? Forgive me. I mean, I am on record as saying he is further ahead than I thought he would be than most freshmen are, especially at that position, because the problem with playing that sort of tweener forward position is you have to do a little bit of everything. You have to handle the ball a little bit more. He's going to have to rebound the ball on this team. You can't shrink from defensive matchups because you're going to get switched on to smaller guys, bigger guys. He's shooting the ball really, really well. He does not look out of place. There are going to be freshman moments. Of course there are. But I would be stunned if he is not in the rotation. And right now, I would say 18 to 20 minutes a night is not outside. Is not an outlandish projection.
Well, I think especially at the start of the year, he's going to, if they got 3 guys out to start the year, or 2.5, they're either working their way back. Sisley's going to be like 8th, in the rotation or 7th in the rotation.
Which is where, that's where he was 7. He was 2nd or 3rd off the bench in the Puerto Rico games.
So. Yeah. So, I think 20 minutes a game is not unreasonable, especially in conference play or non-conference play. Like it might go down a little bit. Like if we got to see kind of how DeVries handles minutes to begin with. Like, does he lean on the, Woodson was always like, I can't play guys 37 minutes a game. Like they're just going to get
And
killed.
then he would. And then Trace Jackson Davis would play 37 minutes a game.
But like,
yeah.
I think that, it was Wilkerson or DeVries, that type of guy, like, and like, does that limit opportunities down kind of line, especially in conference play, where Sicily, maybe it eats into a couple of minutes, but I still think 15, game in conference play would be reasonable projection.
Is there a chance, Hoosier Viking asks, that this year's team is actually going to be able to consistently hit threes? I mean, listen, at a certain point, I just got to see it to believe it. But the history of a lot of these players individually, and the history of DeVries teams and the way his offense operates, I think Indiana will. Certainly, Indiana had better shoot threes more consistently this season because they're going to need to score some points. We were both at Hoosier Hoops on Kirkwood on Thursday night, and nothing overly revelatory happened there, especially given Trent Sisley is not going to be shooting from the second story balcony above five guys much this season. But I am interested in talking about like why Indiana was there, because this is the time of year where I start to have conversations with people on other Big Ten beats. I talked about putting together those preseason polls. I start to have conversations with my friends who take a more national gaze at college basketball, and I know you and I have talked about this, and I wrote about it this week, but I think it is lost on the wider sport, the extent to which this program has lost its fan base. And that doesn't mean in like a permanent way, but I ran these numbers. In the last 10 years, Indiana's 96 and 97 in Big Ten play. They've been to the tournament 3 times. They've only been out of the first weekend once. Their exits in those 3, in the loss that ended those 3 tournament runs, came by 15, 29, and 16 points. If you only say the last 9 years, because you have to go back to 10 years to get the last time Indiana won a Big Ten title. In the last 9 years, they are 81 and 94 in Big Ten play. Archie Miller never beat Purdue. I believe he beat Rutgers only once. Northwestern, Mike Woodson never beat Northwestern. I believe he beat Penn State maybe twice. Like, Indiana has delivered a consistently average product in men's basketball for a decade now. And if you want to take it back to a full generation, it's not that much better. 23 years since a Final Four, 3 Big Ten titles this century. And I think when you couple that to both some national trends being manifested at home, like football football outrunning basketball in popularity, and you also couple it to some of the stuff, and we're not going to turn this into like rumor mongering and cafeteria gossip, but some of the drama that fans have to see play out on social media and sort of like within the team or within sort of like different people voicing their opinions and factions forming like within the playing alumni base and all that kind of stuff. IU fans are just tired of IU basketball. And I mean, there was the student section was full for 1 game last year. 1. Now the tickets are still getting sold. It's not like Indiana's feeling the hit financially, at least in terms of ticket sales, which is the biggest sort of immediate financial strength of IU basketball. But fans just aren't making time for this program. And it is because it's not even like football where it's like constantly like, well, maybe, we hope. And then the Lucy pulls the football out from under Charlie Brown. It is that they just have come to expect average from a program that carries itself like average is unacceptable and then delivers it, far too often. And, this whole month, Darian DeVries, somebody asked Darian DeVries basically about being more open with the media because he's led us into more practices in the last 2 months than Mike Woodson let the media into in 4 years. Archie Miller never opened practice to the media that way. Obviously, DeVries also talked about going out and meeting the fan base. The thing last night on Kirkwood was, I think, very student facing. The scrimmage tonight, the Haunted Hall of Hoops, I think that's a little bit more of kind of like a family thing. Bring your kids out, watch a little basketball. I'm not sure exactly what they'll do with the Haunted Hall of Hoops. Tom Crean often treated that as a scrimmage. We'll see what DeVries does with it. It seems like there is an awareness, maybe not just within the program, but I think more fundamentally within the department, that they kind of have to earn these people's trust back, and they have to earn their interest back. And listen, at the end of the day, winning and losing is what matters. Like, they can do all this, and if they go 15-16, it's not going to change. But I also, for a long time, there was this sort of like, the fans will always be there. It's Indiana basketball. We just need to figure out how to win, how to start winning some games. I think the fans have to be courted back for the first time in a really, really long time. And that was the thing that I found most fascinating about Thursday night.
Well, it's also a changing landscape. I think, yes, the mediocrity sort of fed into kind of what happened. And I think the coaches did specifically too. Like, when you hire coaches that maybe don't have the willingness to engage or the willingness to sort of be front facing and engaged and accessible, like, that's what happens. Like, things go from, losing it makes everything, not just bad, or it makes it toxic. And I think that's how you can kind of define certainly the last 2 years of Woodson's tenure, that he made it like an us versus them thing with the fans, rather than like, we're in all this together. And like, that you saw it fall apart to an extraordinary degree. Like, it didn't need to get there, like with that Illinois game and sort of the ugliness. Like, but I think that was sort of the feeling, like this, that everybody's not pulling in the same direction. And it was kind of a culmination of his tenure. But I mean, I think you've seen, you talk about mediocrity, like, the football landscape now, I think, is just overshadowing basketball in general across the country. And when you have a winning team, I think it's going to make an interesting dynamic going forward with this football and basketball team. Is so they fight for attention, as they fight for kind of space in the fans' heads. I know, like, traditionally, fans obviously of a certain age, all they know is Indiana basketball, but young kids, like, the success the football team had was probably, a certain generation sort of defining moment for their Indiana fandom, right?
No, 100%. I mean, that's kind of my point. Is like,
like, what's the last memory, like the Big Ten
like
championship?
for a long time, Indiana fans have been criticized for, sort of like their veneration of Christian Watford's shot to beat Kentucky. But for a generation of IU basketball fans, that is as good as it ever felt. I understand they won Big Ten titles in that stretch as well, but that moment, the last second shot to beat the number one team, to complete the comeback from the bottom where Tom Green had to start with his rebuild in 2008.
Well, here's an exit.
Flood the floor against Kentucky with the AD standing on the scorer's table, thrusting his fist in the air. That was as good as that was as good as it felt. They haven't even, and to my point about the last 10 years, and really, I think it is fair to be a little bit picky and say, especially look at the last 9 years, there's not been a moment like that. There's not been a moment that was, at least, because remember, the other thing about the watch shot, and I understand it's not a national title, I understand it's not a Big Ten title, whatever, but it was at least significant as the start of something. They followed that up with
something,
two Sweet 16s, a Big Ten title, two players selected in the top 5 of the NBA draft, all that stuff, as opposed to, like, what's the crowning moment of the last 2 coaching tenures? Probably the win at Purdue.
No, the most memorable thing in my tenure so far in Assembly Hall has been the Michigan sucks, or Purdue sucks, so does Michigan and Ohio State. Like,
yeah, but I'm going further. I mean, and this isn't me like, oh, I've been around more than you, but I'm even giving them the grace of going further back.
But I'm just saying, that's the most memorable thing that's happened in Assembly Hall.
What is the best feeling? What moment has left Indiana basketball fans feeling the best in the last 8 years? And it is probably just a Friday night win at Purdue. Like that.
Right.
That's it.
The football team,
or maybe
Assembly Hall.
Or maybe the Rob Finney shot to beat Purdue in Woodson's first season. But again, that's not followed up by greatness. That's not followed up by now we're the number one team in the country in the preseason and we're going to win the Big Ten title and we're going to win the toughest Big Ten that anybody's seen in 10 years. All that it is just not like, I mean, it just, I think I had a line in that story and I'm not Mark Twain, but I think I just said like Indiana has been in a wrestling match with average and lately Indiana is losing. Like it just, I mean, that's, and if average is what you deliver, then average is what you're going to receive from your fan base. And to your point, when you hand them something better just across the parking lot, like they are going to, and it's not like I've said this too, it has not been lost on university leaders. I don't just mean athletics officials. I mean university leaders. How quickly the fan base just bought completely in on a sport that for generations we were told was a hopeless, pointless exercise at Indiana. The minute that fan base was given the opportunity to do so. And I would even, to a certain extent, I would even rewind back to 2019, 2021. And I know it goes bad for Tom Allen, but like, fans sell out that Cincinnati game. Like they are prepared to, I mean, there were probably more IU fans at Iowa in 2021 than there were last weekend. Now, a little bit of that admittedly is I know a ton of IU fans also going to Oregon and going to Penn State. And so maybe they didn't make the Iowa trip because they wanted to go to one of these other road games instead, because they have more reason to believe firing coaches has felt the best in 8 years. I mean, like that's true though. Like that is the most interested fans have probably been. But my point is, in football, the signs were there, even for 5, 6, 7 year lead out. In basketball, the signs.
But now the flip side is
the signs just point to something very different.
But the flip side with the fans, like, do you think they need to recalibrate? Like, if DeVries makes in his first 3 years the tournament 3 times and can't maybe get can't get to the Sweet 16, but gets there, wins a game twice, maybe, or something like that.
Sure.
Like that's the success, right? Like the fans have to maybe like do the fans now have to recalibrate like in this new era of basketball? Like they're never necessarily going to get back what it was to the Bob Knight of it all, and the extraordinary success they had on a yearly basis. Like they can't, because the turn on a coach that is good but maybe doesn't return them to greatness every year. Like
I think that like the
long conversation, but it's more just because the fans contribute to it all as well, and the attitude around the program and things like, look, like I'm not saying, like I said, I think Woodson was largely driving those things, but at the same time, DeVries is now more front facing. He answers a lot of the concerns I think fans had about Woodson, and if the success, especially in his first 2 years, like that's not a bad first 2 years that he had.
No,
like,
I think I do think, and this is a good place for us to kind of bring this to a close, because I think it is a natural sort of way to set the table for what comes next. And I don't know how much basketball we're going to talk like next week, and
right,
certainly it will become much more front burner in the next few weeks. Is like one thing I said, even going back to the summer, is I said that on the one hand, the job, I think I even wrote this like when Woodson announced he would be stepping down at the end of last season. That on the one hand, the program has never been lower in some ways, at least not like in its most modern context, probably not like other than in NCAA sanctions.
Right.
It has not been in worse shape since Bob Knight was fired. On the other hand, though, I do think like the bar for qualifying immediate, like early return success is much lower. Like I don't think it would take much to get fans back on side initially. Now, eventually, there is going to be an expectation. We need to be competing for Big Ten titles. We need to be competing, deep into the tournament. Is Indiana ever going to be like UConn or peak Calipari era Kentucky or whatever? I don't know. But like the long-term expectation will remain, this is the kind of place where you should be able to win at as high of a level as anyone in college basketball if you're doing it right. But the near-term expectation, like to your point, if Indiana wins 48 games and goes to the tournament in each of DeVries' first 2 seasons, I think people will be thrilled. And I think you will see suddenly a lot of that baseline support come back. And then the question is, what do you do with it when you get it? But like it won't be. I mean, I think back to Woodson's first season, it was a slog in January and February, but when they turned it around and they get to the first 4 and they beat Wyoming, it feels like Hoops has 48 games over the first 2 seasons. So like imagine 2 24-win seasons. I think people will be very pleased with that as an initial return.
Do you think they're going to have patience for missing the tournament this year? If they did?
I mean, possibly just because there is such an apathy there, and I don't think it's like calcified apathy. I don't think it's apathy that can't be broken through at some point, but especially because football is where football is. And the dynamics of this are often that if you give a fan base at least one place for the blood to flow successfully, that they can kind of deal with the other not being as good. I don't think people are going to quit on him. I mean, now, again, to your point about Mike Woodson, and this was true to a certain extent with Archie Miller as well, some of that is also the public persona that the coach builds, right? Like some of that is also
buying equity. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, and that is something that DeVries, I think, has been very direct about. Like he has been out in the community, so is his team. They broke up like 2 events into 5, basically. For that's a bit of a that is a bit of an oversimplification, but they essentially broke like what could have been, they turned what could have been an email into a pep rally, because they want to give their fans, they want to face their fans again, and they want to say like, you're part of this. DeVries had a great quote, and I don't have it right in front of me. I'll try to vamp while I find it. But it was I think it was the question where he was asked about opening the program up more, and he said, we're at a place where basketball is incredibly important. Indiana basketball is important to a lot of people, so I want them to be able to have access to something they find really valuable and important to them. That's what we want. We want people to feel like they're not watching from afar. We want them to feel like they're right on the inside and they're stride by stride with us as we go through it, because from a fan standpoint, they have a huge impact on us winning and losing a lot of the time. That type of support doesn't happen everywhere. We have it here. We have a night where every time we toss that ball up, this building and our fan base impacts us winning, and that's critical. So we want them to be a part of it. I think there is a pronounced understanding that you can, if you weaponize this fan base, that's when you are able to start thinking about winning at the higher level that eventually becomes expectation at a program like this. But initially,
that's basically what Sig said about Memorial Stadium, and they build it, and then it kind of builds from there, and it becomes a home field advantage you can take advantage of.
Even just think about last year. Do you know what the one game? Do you remember the one game last year the student section was full? It was Purdue. And they beat a Sweet 16 team by 15 points. They buried them. It was essentially never a game. And it's funny because I called Chris Foreman, the SID at Purdue this week, to ask him a question about because I couldn't find a direct answer online, the size of the student section at Mackey Arena. And I told him what I was writing about, and he said, well, all I ever see is that student section full, because they're always full for Purdue.
Always full because
but it was, that's an example of what this fan base can be. That's an example of what this fan base can do. But Indiana, I think, recognizes it's got to go back. It's got to go out and get them again. And then it's obviously got to provide them something worth supporting and worth watching. But I think in the past, the assumption internally would have been, we just need to win. They'll always be there. They'll always show up. And once we start winning, it will be the way it always used to be again. Now I think there is a recognition that they've got to go get them first, and they've got to earn that trust back and then work forward from there. Hoop finishes with this. Indiana volleyball with a big West Coast road trip. Need to get a split. Yes. 2, I believe both USC and UCLA are ranked going into this week, and one of them's like 24th. So, it's right on the cut line. Indiana's got a couple nice wins this season. The Miami reverse sweep was good. Sweeping Washington. Washington's been good at times. in the last few years in volleyball. I don't know exactly what the Huskies are this year, but that's a win that at least kind of jumps off the page a little bit. But this weekend is very important for Steve Aird's team. If the Hoosiers come back from LA with at least one win, then I think we start to change the conversation around IU volleyball this season. That'll do it for us. He's Mike Niziolek, Landman Insider. I'm Zach Osterman, Landman. Can I just be Landman?
You just want to be Landman.
I can just be I'll just be Landman, but not John Hamm. I'll be Demi Moore. I'm running the company. I'm running the company from here on out. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Banners for October 3rd, 2025. If you're watching this on YouTube and you've made it this far, just know this is going to bring up the Friday rundown for this week. Just didn't want to stack those two videos on top of one another. We will be back next week to talk about one of the biggest games in IU football history. For now, have a great weekend. Thank you all so much for listening. For those who have watched along, thank you so much for watching. We will talk to you soon.